90 minutes before 8 o'clock here on Morning Live. Now, more than 3,500 professionals from the teaching and education circles are expected to gather at the Gallagher Convention Centre for a two-day Indaba. One of the issues to be tackled at the event is teenage pregnancy and sexually transmitted infections amongst adolescents. The event will be held under the theme, Enter a World of Educational Knowledge. Now, Professor Francois Venter, Deputy Executive Director from the Wits Reproductive Health and HIV Institute, is one of the speakers at the event, and he joins us here in studio now. Good to have you. Welcome to Morning Live. All right, so, you know, when we look at South Africa, what should the country consider in sexual health programs, given this high rate of teenage pregnancy amongst the youth and these sexually transmitted infections?
So we've known for a long time that adolescents are sexually active. We have objective evidence in the film of teenage pregnancy, in terms of HIV rates, in terms of, and more recently we've had lots of very worrying data on sexually transmitted infections, particularly amongst girls over the age of 15. And what it just suggests to us is that these kids need better tools to keep themselves healthier. And that the education system at the moment, certainly to my mind, is failing them in terms of what those tools, as to what it's actually providing them. Yeah. And I think it's an international problem. We battle to deal with the fact of dealing with adolescent sexuality. And rather than, you know, deal with it up front, it's easier to pretend it's not there. So at the moment, the country is in a terrible position where it's being held hostage by parents who are intrinsically conservative and don't want to think about their little ones having sex. We have school boards, which are very conservative, and the teaching profession itself, which is very, very conservative, running almost a low-level campaign against sex education within the school sector. Yeah.
Well, I mean, what I'm gathering is that a lot of things need to change, obviously. Because, I mean, there's always that old sort of saying is that if you, as a parent, are not educating your children about sexual activities and about sex, who is? Because somebody is teaching them, and I think you'd rather them know from your perspective as opposed to somebody else's perspective. So what needs to change? Does it start from the home until the end of that chain you spoke about?
I think it's really hard to talk to your kids about sex. I mean, I think parents aren't really given that life skill. It's not something you sort of innately gather. So I think that we also need to be a little bit soft on the parents in terms of just expecting them to take this on. Also, speaking as an ex-teen, the last person I wanted to talk about sex, to have the sex talk from, was my parents. Yeah. So I actually think the schools are a great place to start. The problem we have is that the life skills programs which are within the schools at the moment, which are adequate, are being taught often by teachers who battle with the subject themselves, and it's much easier to come from a very firm moralistic perspective, which is just say no, don't do that, stop being naughty, than it is about actually having quite a complex conversation. And you know, teenagers are hard to speak to, and they do require a certain level of training and of sophistication to approach. And the issue that we're seeing starting to rise in South Africa around sexuality is, or throughout the world actually, issues around being gay and coming out as a teen is, you know, throws up really complicated things in the playground and within the schools themselves. How do you deal with it? How do you stop the bullying that's associated with that? So all these things, how do you deal with a 16-year-old who gets pregnant? Do you throw her out of the school like has previously been put forward? Do you just allow her to continue to come to school? It's a really difficult situation. Yeah,
it really is. I mean, it's a tough thing, but the world is moving so fast, and you've got to move with it. Unfortunately, that's the reality. But the harsh reality is there are still very high incidences of teenage pregnancy. And that, you know, in a way makes it very difficult. I mean, we've spoken to a lot of people that have come forward. We had a lovely lady last week who came and spoke to us about her story of falling pregnant when she was about 15 years old and what her life was like. I mean, writing matric with a baby in the room and having to feed a baby and still go out and write an exam, and how difficult that all is. Perhaps we need more of that. We need them to go into schools and speak to students and show them the reality of what it is like to have a child. And it's just not that moment of glory in having sex. That's really it.
I think we know that girls who defer their pregnancies till after they finish school, even better after they finish some sort of tertiary education, do so much better in the workplace and are so much more independent. And I think if we spend more time talking to the parents and saying, listen, this is your vested interests, because often it's the parents and the grandparents who end up looking after these children in South Africa. If we could just explain to them that, you know, having your child not get pregnant, giving her the tools not to get pregnant, is probably you know, in your own self-interest as well as in the interest of this young woman.
Yeah, and also just not only highlighting the fact, because, you know, it's amazing when you speak to teenagers, and I've heard these conversations taking place where they're more concerned about teenage pregnancy than they are about catching any sexually transmitted disease. They don't even think about that. It's a teenage pregnancy as opposed to the sexually transmitted disease. But we just did the interview talking from Stats SA's perspective. Amongst the youth, TB and HIV, AIDS are the biggest killers in the youth.
So we, one of the stats that we see is that young people still continue, it's gone slightly down over the last 10, 15 years. It's still catastrophic, and particularly amongst young girls, where almost a third of them are HIV positive by the age of 21. So we can't wait for them to hit their kind of late teens to start the education process. You have to start earlier than that. And we still see 12-year-old girls pregnant at the hospital I work in. So, you know, people need to acknowledge that their children are going to start having sex while they're in, hopefully at high school, but in certain cases even in primary school. So we do need interventions. We need condoms, we need STD education, we need HIV prevention, we need you know, contraception in the schools. And I think that the Department of Health, for instance, is quite bullish about pushing this forward. It's obviously politically incredibly difficult to shepherd it through, and there's a huge amount of opposition from political parties, from school boards, as I said, and from, you know, from civil society.
Just finally and very quickly, I mean, a platform like this, it's a vitally important platform. African Edu Week, and we're talking about really big issues. But is this getting to the youth, though? They need this message. Are they invited? Will they be there? How is this message going to get out?
So I'm coming from the health sector, not from the education sector, but I've just looked at the program and it looks really exciting. It does look like they're tackling all sorts of very, very edgy education issues. But the youth themselves are telling, there have been several studies done in the last year where they've gone to the youth and said, what would you like at school? They want HIV testing, they want condoms, they want sex ed. Who wouldn't? You know, they're not stupid. Unfortunately, they're running this battle then with the broader society that's actually preventing them from accessing it.
Yeah. All right, let's leave it there. Thank you for coming in and talking to us here on the program. Professor Francois Venter, Deputy Executive Director at Wits, talking about this Edu Week and about issues affecting the youth, particularly when it comes to teenage pregnancy and sexually transmitted diseases as well. Stay tuned. We'll be back after.